Hey, Vlad, we are here, and Blue Jay Nation, we are here together. It is
Awesome.
so great to see you all. We apologize for the brief delay. We had a little technical difficulty, but the wonderful thing is that we are together now. So, Vlad, it is awesome to see you, brother. It has been way too long. I've seen you in these webinars, which is great, but it's been a little while since we've done these webinars, and there has been no shortage of developments happening on your end. And I just have to say that it is so great to see you, and you look amazing, brother. It's really good to see you. How are you doing these days, all things considered?
Well, like the difficult part is I'm fine, and it's just today that I've learned that one of my not close friends but acquaintances has passed away. He was at the he volunteered to join the Ukrainian Army, and I think he was on the front line recently. So it's it's I'm grateful that I am safe. It's
Yeah.
just that I know that that's not the story for all the people in Ukraine, and I think like a third of the country has displaced internally and externally. Traveling in Europe, being away from your home is not easy. So I'm lucky, but I
Yeah.
realize that this is not a common situation these
Yeah.
days.
Well, Vlad, I saw that. I saw that you had posted that. It was about an hour ago, uh, and my heart goes out to you and Alexander's family, and you know I would be feel it's only appropriate that maybe we take a moment of silence, not just for Alexander, but for all of our Ukrainian sisters and brothers in this moment. So if all of our attendees as well join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. Vlad, we're caring about you, and this is we're a family. We're a Blue Jay family, and without question, we've we've um, we've touched base with you a couple of times through the college's Center for Global Understanding and Peacemaking, and we're so grateful to partner with them as an alumni office in the past, and we're grateful to keep these up with you as long as you're willing and as long as you're able, I suppose, to do so. And we're just so fortunate to have you in our lives and to be able to get some sense from you directly. Um, what things are like inside Ukraine in this moment. So I think if you're willing, what we'll do maybe is I'll drop off and you could provide maybe just a general overview of things, and then I'll pop back on and we'll have a conversation. And I encourage all of our attendees to put questions to in the question function of Zoom. And what I'll do is I'll be looking at those, and we'll use those to kind of fuel our conversation a little bit with Vlad. So Vlad, please fill us in if you will.
I wonder. I think like I can only, I guess, speak about Kyiv, where I am. It's the capital, and I wonder if I can show my screen and show maybe a couple of the maps to kind of uh, inform on the greater situation. I can only speak of Kyiv. So let me see. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, you should be
Uh,
able to share.
oh, it's disabled. Okay. Um, can maybe can I send you some images
I was
or?
going to say try it now.
Mm-hmm. Uh, mhm. And as always, there's like I have to allow it. on my computer now. So give me just one second,
No
and I will.
problem. Technology's great when it works, right?
I have to allow Zoom access to Chrome, and I think I did it. So let's see. Maybe I can show the entire screen now. If you can see yourself, that would be. Am I showing the screen? No, I think. Share my screen. I think I can't. Well, I wonder how we can best do this. Maybe I can share some of these files and links to them. But in general, we are in the 83rd day of the active phase of the war. It started 8 years ago, but then there was a ceasefire, and there was sort of when Russia occupied Crimea, that was like a territory they just captured without a shot being fired, really. And then they started fighting in the east of Ukraine. And after that, there was an agreement, an internationally brokered agreement, which was a ceasefire agreement. So the war has been ongoing, but and the fighting has been actually on a very slow, kind of like frozen conflict style, frozen. And then the active phase is what we're talking about right now. That has been going on for the past 3 months. And initially, well, I think most intelligence services knew that this war was coming. Russia was planning war games in February, and since November of 2021, United States and British intelligence services that were warning different governments of a possible invasion in the end of February. And nobody was in Ukraine was that well prepared for this like massive invasion across almost 1,000 miles. That's like the border of Ukraine with Russia. It's almost 1,000 miles long, and there was this massive invasion coming in 3 months ago on all fronts, and from Belarus, from the north. So initially, what happened is a lot of the tanks and military equipment just drove through a large part of Ukrainian territory in the south, in the east, and approaching Kyiv and Kharkiv, big cities in Ukraine. And and then started artillery fire that was targeting civilian um, infrastructure, so apartment buildings. I mean, everything. It was not a war that we're used to. It was really kind of like a war of destruction, something similar to what we probably saw in Syria, where Russian planes were flying around cities, bombing civilian areas that had no military value. And this is what was happening in Ukraine in the first weeks, and in Kyiv, where I am. Since then, Ukrainian army has gathered some strength and started pushing back Russian forces. And that was successful in the north of Ukraine now. So right now, where I am, there is no Russian army in the near vicinity. They're back to being within the borders of Belarus and Russia. So the only danger that remains right now are cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, of which there were over 2,000 fired across different Ukrainian cities. So Russia is bombing Ukrainian cities from using air bombs from Belarusian territory, from by flying planes within Russian border zones, territories bordering Ukraine. So for most civilians anywhere in Ukraine, the real danger is well, is being a civilian. So Russia will and does bomb Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and buildings, just everything. I mean, the thing to know about this war is the weaponry that are being used, the weapons that are not very accurate. So even if, I don't know, Russia aims to bomb a bridge or a power plant, they will still hit civilian buildings, and they've been doing it discriminately. So that danger remains. The hope is that they're running out of bombs, actually, that these cruise missiles that they're firing from planes. And one one fact that was very strange to me, it's when I learned that some of these bombs were being so they're airplane rockets that are huge, that they've been firing at Ukrainian cities over hundreds of miles, but from the Caspian Sea, which is very far from Ukraine. But the thing to know about Russian weapons is they're using some of the most obsolete, some of the most inaccurate weapons, which even on launch, sometimes they just fall. And this is why they're launching them from sea, from the sea, from the Caspian Sea in the east of Ukraine and from the Black Sea in the south of Ukraine. They're using outdated weapons that are not accurate, and those that remain the danger. So in most cities, like in Odessa, in the on the Black Sea, the casualties are not massive. They're not huge in the cities that are not surrounded by Russian armies, which Kyiv is not, and it's safe in that way. So, but the danger still remains that some of the cruise missiles that they fire from very far away, they're still a danger to most civilians living in most cities and most towns anywhere in Ukraine. The parts where the active fighting is happening, Russia has taken over maybe 10%, yet another 10% of the territory of Ukraine, maybe something like half the size of Pennsylvania. In those and sealed, when Russia occupies them, those territories are sealed off. The people are sort of trapped there. And life for civilians there, it's awful, because some of the people who are trapped there, they're being sent, the males are being conscripted and sent to the front lines just to reveal the Ukrainian military positions. They have no equipment, no military training. It's just civilians that Russia drafts into the army, and basically just uses as cannon fodder. And civilians in those trapped cities, they are being shipped to populated parts of Russia, and those cities and small towns that Russia has occupied, there was probably about 2 million people there, and 1 million they have already resettled across Russia, without asking people whether they want to leave or not, really. And then there are parts of Ukraine that are free. This is the majority of Ukraine right now. Um, if if and majority is not on the front lines. So in those towns, life goes on as usual, or as it can. Um, I don't know if this is a common knowledge fact or not. Male population, all men 18 through 60, are not allowed to leave the borders of Ukraine. So what the people who have left as temporary, people say refugees, but really I think they are people seeking temporary shelter. Most Ukrainians do like Ukraine and they want to come back here. But the ones who are fleeing, the 10 million displaced, 5 of which are in the European countries, they are women and children. And men, I mean, fathers of 3 or more children are allowed to join, or men over 60 are allowed to leave Ukraine, but otherwise, men are expecting to sort of hold fort. Even if we're not in the army, we're expected to just remain in Ukraine. And if you're on the front line, I think the expectation is that you join the volunteer force, that will help dig trenches, or not being on the front line, but at least will help stop the possible invasion. So setting up roadblocks, things like that. So that's the life in Ukraine. In some parts that that are very far from the war zone, life goes on as usual with the occasional air siren blasts. They usually happen at night, and people are supposed to shelter somewhere. But otherwise, life sort of goes on as usual. In other parts that are near the front lines, Russian artillery fire just flattens entire villages and small towns. They've been trying to do it to Kyiv, have been pushed back. They've been trying to do it to Kharkiv. They have all also been pushed back. Um, but the nature of the war is such that there is heavy use of armaments. So I think one important thing to realize. I know Elizabethtown has a very deep tradition in peaceful conflict resolution, and I think here I have bad news, because I think this is not the conflict that can be very peacefully resolved. Um, Russia wants basically either destruction of Ukraine or a complete takeover of Ukraine, and that's their position. And if they do take over Ukraine, it will be just a concentration camp made out of this country. They want complete destruction, and they've even removed the mention of Ukraine from their textbooks at this point. So the only option for Ukraine is to survive. It is to fight, and it is to ask for our allies to send more weapons to defend our cities, because otherwise, you know, we know what happens. We don't want more genocide happening here, and this is why when United States is sending military aid, it's not to prolong the war. It is to avoid more genocides, really. So unfortunately, so far, military seems to be the only way that this war can end, and I think this is a very difficult thing to realize. Um, and I gave a speech to the Peaceful Conflict Resolution Center in E-Town, and I think the only thing I had to say there is that the peaceful resolution can only happen on the personal level. So helping damaged cities rebuild, helping civilians fleeing from the war zones. I think the only peace can be achieved on that personal scale, and that support has been immense, and the outpouring of help has been global, and United States has done a huge and amazing job helping. So diplomatic solution should be achieved. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with a terrorist state like Russia, it seems highly unlikely that they can be talked into it very soon. Sorry, this was not the question that you asked, but um,
No, that's fine. I mean, I think that's your perspectives are really what we're interested in, Vlad. I mean, I think um, these are very complex and multifaceted things that you're talking about, and there aren't any simple or clear answers apart from the obvious, which is the war just needs to stop. And I mean, but at the same time, we all know that like you said, um, when you're dealing with an opposing force that has the goals that Russia does, that makes it problematic to just say, well, just stop. It's not that simple. Um, and so, yeah, the complexity of this is something that's not lost on us either. And you mentioned a couple of things in the things that you've shared, and I think one of the things that I was doing to just prepare for this evening was I was looking and I was trying to boil down what are the big messages that we're getting in the United States right now, into a couple of kind of big points. I mean, it's Ukraine is in the news every single day, and there are various outlets, information outlets that cover it in different ways, obviously, and emphasize certain things. But I think what I've been able to call from different sources is that right now the big things that are in the United States news right now is that there's a $40 billion package that was just unanimously passed by Senate that will hopefully be going then, well, it probably within a couple of days it will be in front of Congress for to be reviewed and potentially moved forward. So that's a big thing, is that there's strength around providing more support. That's something that's pretty prevalent here. And you've had Ukraine has had some high-profile visitors from the United States lately. In First Lady Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden. You've had Senator Mitch McConnell there. You've had Representative Nancy Pelosi and various others. That's just from the United States Congress. That's not to say even the other leaders from other countries that have been coming there too. So I think related to all of that, I'm curious, Vlad, how is that being perceived, received? What's the response? What's the reaction? Is that having an effect? Because I think the impression that it's giving in the United States is that this is a boost. These are things that at least from a morale perspective, there's hope that maybe this is providing a little boost to the people of Ukraine. But is that how that's being perceived?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think Blinken and Austin
Mm-hmm.
visited Kyiv on April 24th. So when senior officials visit a country which is, fighting off an invasion, I think this sends a very strong signal. First, that they are supporting, the country that's defending itself, and second, they're not afraid of the aggressor.
Mm-hmm.
This has been immense. Lots of foreign officials have visited and shown this support, and I think this is not because Ukraine is just so important and blah blah blah. It's this is I think the way that our president framed it, and I think this was a correct one, is that it's one, unfortunately, of many wars between the democratic world and the kind of like despotic, authoritarian, totalitarian world, which we've been living in peace because democratic countries don't fight. There's just
Mm-hmm.
it's an idiotic proposition for peaceful countries that want to trade and develop, as opposed to devour more territory. And this is what, unfortunately, authoritarian and totalitarian states do. Maybe maybe this has been a long time ago, but that was the justification for the first um, Gulf War. First President Bush um, um, was the first Desert Storm operation was not because America wanted to invade the Middle East. It was because Saddam Hussein was attacking another sovereign state. It was a war to prevent this kind of thing that is happening in Ukraine. And if the world doesn't send a message to countries that it's not okay to attack your neighbors and just to devour them, they will continue doing it. And with Russia, I think we've seen a pattern here. Even if the war in Chechnya, which was in 1994, the first one, could have been considered a local conflict. It was part of the Soviet Union, and then it wanted to become an independent republic. Russia didn't let it happen. That could have been perceived as, that was part of Russia. But then when Russia started attacking Georgia in 2008 and then Ukraine in 2014, those are the first indications that Russia is not a good actor on the international scene, that peace is a very fragile thing, and then when there are such actors as Russia, this would not end with Ukraine. And I think that was the understanding, that this was a potentially global war. Russia has stated that it had plans to move further, sort of capture Ukraine and then maybe use the Ukrainians to go as cannon fodder, attacking Poland, which is a NATO country. And then, the importance of Ukraine is not because it is Ukraine. It is because after Ukraine, um, the boundary of NATO starts, and based on the fifth article of that agreement, of that alliance, an attack on a NATO country means an attack, that all the members of NATO will be they must join this war to defend, right? So had Ukraine been conquered in the 3 days as Russia planned, the next step would be, American troops in Poland defending Poland from the further Russian invasion. Russia stated that Ukraine is not their final goal. They want more countries. I think ex-president Medvedev mentioned they want to go all the way to Portugal, in maybe as a threatening gesture, but Poland feels the threat, I think, and the Baltic states feel the threat. And this is not this is no longer talk.
Right, right.
So support for Ukraine, it's really to avoid a larger war of Europe.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Well, and you're that actually kind of leads to my second um, kind of boiled down news overview of kind of what are the main headlines in the U.S. right now. And apart from the package, the package moving through Congress, I would say number two, and not in any particular order in terms of priority, but kind of connected to what you just said, the interest of Sweden and Finland to join NATO is something that's a big headline right now, and the potential blockage of that by Turkey, and what that all means, and does it mean that ultimately won't happen, or is there a pathway? And obviously there's some saber rattling happening from Russia as well when it comes to that.
Right.
The thought of NATO growing. So I think that's another thing that's kind of a big thing that's hitting the headlines here. Perspectives on that, Vlad? Anything in Ukraine? How are they viewing
Right.
Sweden and Finland?
Ukraine, like with yeah. So the new cycle, I think, yeah, when you're not at war, I think it's slower. But for Ukraine, it's pretty clear what's happening. Ukraine applied to join the NATO, to join the process of NATO in 2008, and then that was blocked by France and Germany. But Turkey is not a major actor in NATO, and well, their president is also authoritarian, so there should be some kind of mechanism. I think all that Turkey wants is some concessions from United States, basically, and
Mm-hmm.
and there will not be a barrier for Sweden and Finland joining. And I think with the invasion of Ukraine, Sweden and Finland realize that if they don't have the protection of the NATO, which really is it's a nuclear umbrella, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear countries don't fight each other. And Russia has nuclear weapons, Finland and Sweden don't. Uh, when they join the NATO, there's no conceivable way that there will be a war, because that has a potential of turning to a nuclear war, and that has been, that has stopped Soviet Union since the 60s from starting wars with the United States, and they will stop all further wars in the future as well. And Finland and Sweden, not being nuclear states, realize that Russia can just go and say, oh, we have nuclear weapons and you don't, so give up, surrender, and be incorporated into Mother Russia. And they realized that, and they made the logical choice to join the alliance with nuclear weapons and the greatest, most advanced military. They have also very advanced militaries, but um, we're still trying to act independently. And there's just they realize that in this neighborhood, there is neutrality is not an option that you have.
Yeah. Well, that's
And
it's. I'm
and they
sorry. Go
will be
ahead.
in NATO, right?
Yeah.
That there's not a question in my mind that Turkey wants some money or some weapons, and then they'll say, okay, we agree. We don't agree, but we accept.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some complexities from what I understand. There's some complexities to that as well. So nothing is clear cut and easy. But you're right. I mean, I think your perspectives seem to be right on. That countries that aren't a part of NATO are seeing this as a warning sign, and
Countries
they're
name well, not even countries neighboring Russia, right? Because
yeah.
we have the history of Syria. Russian military was active in Central African Republic, in Mali, where they've been just their military has been running with impunity and doing the same thing, destroying civilian infrastructure,
Yeah.
hospitals, and helping authoritarian regimes. And I think the message here is, um, democratic nations need to band together and show all the bad actors and authoritarian and totalitarian countries that aggressive behavior is not acceptable, and the consequences will be, they will not be able to take the consequences. I think China, with this war in Ukraine, has gotten this message that by invading Taiwan, which they still plan to do, as far as I'm concerned. I think American military estimated that they want to have a war in 2027, but now they've realized the magnitude of sanctions first, that that should they choose to do that, that they will be under, and that I think will stop them in their tracks and will at least force them to think twice about this happening. So I see this problem and these issues that are being now generated by this war in Ukraine much greater than just a question of NATO um, or Europe. This is, I think, we are on the cusp of big, massive political changes in Europe. They're already happening with Finland, with Sweden, with Germany, and lots of European countries discovering that Russia can use energy as weapons by cutting off supplies to
Sure.
Poland and Bulgaria recently, and Finland, because this whole theory of appeasement, peace through appeasement, I think has shown itself to be a false one. I think I think we need a new one. We do need peace. We just need a better approach to bad actors. I don't know what it should be, but what has been clear is that the UN, which was supposed to safeguard peace, has not been effective in this. And we need we need new global institutions, and we need new alliances, and they should be based on values, not just trade with anyone and hope that trade will, bring McDonald's and an eternal peace to everything. Russia, had McDonald's. There was this
Right.
saying that two countries that have a McDonald's will never go to war. Ukraine
Yeah.
and Russia have McDonald's, and here we are at war. But I think the deeper message there was that democracies don't go to war.
Hmm.
Um, and I know this is a tough message for with all the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. There is this fatigue that America is now, I think, more insular. It doesn't want to get involved into wars. But I think the reality is that if democracies don't band together, um, we will just enter this very dangerous phase, and then wars will be basically unavoidable, because
Hmm.
if the world is left to authoritarian, totalitarian regimes, um, we should forget about peace,
Hmm.
basically.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you brought up McDonald's. That too has been in the news, that McDonald's is pulling out of Russia. So obviously that's that's news in your place too. But I think the symbolism of it is not lost, as well. And I think you articulated that wonderfully. And I would say the third news item that's kind of a big thing, in the U.S. is really just the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, and just Mariupol overall has been kind of a consistent focal point for, news outlets in the U.S., and the struggles of the individuals who were in that steel plant for so long, and, all that they were going through to defend it and to stay strong, and so on and so forth. I mean, I think, um, the news of that has really kind of been dominating things the past 2 days. And Mariupol, I have to say too that I watched the documentary that you had posted on your Facebook page. It
Oh
was
wow.
maybe a week or so ago. It's for those of you who are in our audience, if you're interested in seeing it, it's called The Chronicles of Hell, and it's called and it's specifically it's a documentary on Mariupol. Vlad, is there anything you'd like to share about that documentary?
It's so it's first person accounts. It's based on interviews of civilians who survived and have evacuated to Ukraine. Just um, to give it some background, Mariupol is it's an industrial town. It's on Azov Sea, a city of what used to be 500,000, sort of size of Miami. The steel plant that we've been hearing about, it's the size of a small European capital. So it's this massive steel works. Ukraine is one of the largest exporters of steel in Europe. It has so we have one of the largest steel plants who processes it. Um, like all these iron ore deposits that we have here. And it's not just so you have one we have one near Elizabethtown, right? Bethlehem Steelworks.
Mm-hmm.
So Mariupol, as of steel, is probably 50 times bigger than that, and it goes several stories deep. So it's a maze. It's a city within a city. That's why the about 1,000, I think, um, of Ukrainian military forces were able to hold it off. I mean, no city can be under siege, I think, for that long. But they did have supplies and water and food and medicine up until recently. Um, to be honest, so it's a city that was 10 kilometers from the territory that was previously occupied by Russia in the 2014 war. So that was the first target, and it's a city that's completely surrounded, and so it was a city under siege. In the film, you will see, well, it's just the residents attesting to the tactics. So once Russia surrounded the city, it put it under siege. So bombings were happening every day all over the city, and the civilians were trapped there. They weren't allowed to leave when Russia was when Russian troops occupied different parts of the city. They didn't even allow people to move within the city um, from one area to another. So that was that's, I think that's genocide basically. This is not an acceptable war tactic in any war. Wars are not illegal in under UN, under many of the international laws, but there are rules that people after the horrors of the first world war, no use of chemical gas against troops or civilians, no use of landmines, no use of weapons indiscriminately when there is a high risk of civilian casualties. So Russia follows none of those rules, and in that movie, I think it's very clear that the people who have not left the city under, you know, people who have not done their best to leave their city, um, their chances of survival were not very high.
Mm-hmm.
Basically,
Mm-hmm.
no food was allowed to be brought in, no medicine. The Red Cross organization, nobody was allowed in. No humanitarian aid, no supplies from anyone by the Russian army, and that was, I think, a tactic to force Ukraine to surrender that, the territory that they've captured, and possibly just to show the rest of the Ukrainian cities, look, we can destroy, your city completely. We'll do this to the rest of your country. So surrender. I think that was the message that
Mm-hmm.
Russia was trying to send. And that is my commentary. The army that was there, they were well, they've been basically trying to hold the positions, but they've been kind of retreating and retreating, and the only logical place for them to be was to end up in that power plant, that military steel plant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was bombed every day, but it is a very massive and very, uh, it has lots of underground floors, so people were surviving under bombings for almost 3 months. Uh, I honestly didn't think any of them would survive. It's just impossible.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad they were. I think there was this huge international rescue effort, even involving the Pope, and just like every possible um, person who could somehow influence Russians. And but I think those people who are now evacuated, the military, Ukrainian military, the civilians. The civilians will be probably just deported somewhere in Russia. The military will, I don't know, Russia, I think, is now working on the law to whoever they label as the Nazis, they will put under trial, and they will not be exchanged for captured Russian soldiers. And I think, yeah, at first when Azov, that's like the regiment was formed, it was mostly kind of this like right wing that's kind of like fighters who formed that. But that was 2014. Since then, that regiment has been. I think it's fairly diverse at this point. there are, right-wing fighters in probably every army in the world, and that's not what it is right now. There are women, there are gays in there. There's a variety of ideologies and ways of thinking that those people are following. Russia has been using propaganda to basically placate them as, these are the Ukrainian Nazis. So, and that's why they take the license to, destroy them or do whatever they want.
Mhm.
But that's also the Russian narrative to all of Ukraine. So they're here to, if you listen to Russian news, to denazify, and that means basically killing everyone who doesn't agree with them.
Mhm.
Um, so one part of surviving through this war and staying sane is actually um, getting quite resistant, developing resistance to Russian propaganda, which is
Mhm.
not only working in Russia but in some of the American and European media.
Mhm.
So it's important to educate yourself on that language that can be used for the purposes of propaganda, and try to use to get confirmations from multiple sources.
Mhm. I think that's great advice for all of us, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I think um, it's clear that there's at least from some of our previous sessions with you, I think one of the questions that had been asked each of those times was perceptions of Volodymyr Zelensky, and I think without question he has a presence in the news outlets. He has a presence each and every day on some level. His words and his image and updates and so on and so forth. So there's a presence there in the United States. I'm curious, how are your feelings and how have they changed? It's probably been about a month or so since we last talked with you. How are the feelings about the leadership in Ukraine at this point?
So I think the real leadership is really the Ukrainian army and
Hmm.
the army commander. I mean, we have an actor as a president who has been very effective
Hmm.
in delivering the message, which is very important for Ukraine to survive. And I'm very grateful to the president, but I think we shouldn't credit him. Um, it's the Ukrainian army and the
Hmm.
generals who are being effective at defending Ukraine. He's
Hmm.
been effective in generating support,
Hmm.
and that's the job of a president in Ukraine. Actually, it's international affairs. That's more like, you know Blinken's job, like the Secretary of the Department of State. And yeah, since the war started, he's been the perfect president. I think
Hmm.
he's been very effective at delivering this message. So it helps to have an actor as a president in times like these. But he's not just following his own, thinking.
Sure,
There
sure.
is he does have advisors, and the army is helping him to figure out what kind of weapons we need, and
Hmm.
things like this. So in a time of war, you can only support your president, and
Sure.
I'm 100% behind him, as I'm sure most Ukrainians are. But we
Yeah.
also shouldn't lose sight that it's not the president who is fighting. Um, it's the armed forces, the volunteers, and lots of non-military volunteers who are
Sure.
trying to keep the country together. So
Yeah.
lots
The
of
sacrifices from a lot of people. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah. No, that's great. I really appreciate that perspective. It feels as if, at least from this end, it feels as if he is doing a lot to keep this in people's minds and hearts and thoughts, and he's putting himself in places where he can deliver a message, and it does seem as if he's effectively able to deliver it. And I think in that regard, it does, at least from this end, in the United States, it feels as if he is the right person at the right time, in that regard. But without question, you need to have a really strong supporting cast, and you need to have people who are, oftentimes the brains behind the operation that don't get the spotlight, that don't get the accolades, and so on, that are also making sacrifices that deserve to be lifted up. And I think it's not lost on us too that's happening. So it's not a perception that he's doing it all, at least from my analysis of things. But there's no question that he is enabling the message to continue to be out there in front of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
He's effective.
Yeah. Well, we've been on for about an hour now, and I don't. It's not lost on me that this is about 1 o'clock your time, ish.
Fine.
So we are so grateful that you are staying up to be with us, and that we're hoping that this is a way that we can also express to you directly just how much we're caring about you as a Blue Jay family, and that what's happening matters here, and it matters to us, and it matters to this country, as evidenced by all of the news items that we talked about, and all of the things that we've covered over the past hour. We do have a question from an audience member, and it's something that you have gotten each of our times that we've done these, and that's as a humble Blue Jay, what can be done by individuals on this end? What's the most effective way now? And recognizing that answer that may have been given a month ago might not be the same answer now, and that this is an evolving thing. So, Vlad, is there a way that you might be able to provide some help with that question?
So I think when you want to deliver effective aid, it should come at the intersection of what you can do and what the person or the country, in our case, needs. And that would be effective help. Just a little anecdote. Another graduate of my postgrad school
Mm-hmm.
was here in Kyiv. He was volunteering at the World Kitchen
Mm-hmm.
in Poland. So there's a train that goes from Kyiv and takes out people from the war zone to Poland and countries in Europe. And there were hundreds of thousands of people going through that small town. And he was there. And then recently that flow is drying up, and they need fewer hands basically in that kitchen. And he arrived to Kyiv, and I spent a day with him, showing him some of the Russian tanks and ATVs and cruise missiles that were just like found in fields outside. And we have a military museum which now has gained new relevance. It was about World War II, but now it's about this one. And he was here, and he was seeking, he was that determined to help. So he arrived here, he stayed at a hotel, and he didn't know which one was safe. And he spent $400 at this hotel, which was like for diplomats and people who are, highest officials who visit Kyiv. And I said, no, here's like a $30 hotel or a $70 hotel.
Mm-hmm.
You can stay. And he was expecting a call from a volunteering organization, and they never did. Or they said, if we have some work for you to do, then we will call you, and if not, go back. So I, I told him, we don't need heads. There's half of the city's residents are here, and most of them don't need help. So I've driven away a volunteer. I'm not a very good advisor, but I think it's because of that intersection, right? He had the will and the opportunity and the funds to help, but that wasn't the help needed. In Ukraine, I think the biggest help that we need is the weapons, right? The American government is providing that. So help here would be to defend that choice that the American politicians have made, and to trust them that this is the right one, um, because there's no other way for Ukraine to survive, really. So you can, I'm not asking to send weapons, but at least not support your own government in their decision to support Ukraine. Then second one would be sanctions on Russia, because money that Russia gets from exports of oil and gas and other things uh, helps them to fund the things that they want to buy, high tech things from United States to build their own weapons and continue fighting the wars. So, for example, if you're working at an American company, which is a multinational one, um, ask them about what's their position on Russia or
Mhm.
other countries, for that matter, that are aggressive and that have plans to to conquer the world. That's another thing. I think it's basically immoral now to do business with Russia, because any business with the regime like that, it's supporting the war.
Mhm.
So if you can help not support the war, if you even ask the question at whatever workplace that you work that may or may not have any business connections with Russia, I think that would be of help, because I
Mhm.
think I think the time for values-based leadership has come, and
Mhm.
it shows the importance of it. A lot of countries that have relied on trade with Russia, like Germany, that since the war in 2014 has increased their imports of energy. I think it shows that that's not a very good strategy in the long
Mhm.
term.
Mhm.
So a lot of um, humanitarian aid is being delivered to Ukraine. So I don't think there is, a huge need in clothing or in food. Ukraine actually exports 10 times more food than than the people consume. So don't do that. Don't send food. Maybe like military grade first aid kits, I think, is a
Mhm.
need, and there are some organizations that are helping send it here. So maybe that's help that can be done, but also for yourself, develop that resistance to propaganda
Mhm.
from bad actors, from authoritarian and totalitarian states. And I strongly advise, if you're working at a business which is international, to advocate for some kind of code of ethics in
Mhm.
doing business. Knowing that China is planning to attack Taiwan, what do you do? Knowing about some government committing atrocities, what is the position in that company? I think as like employees, you have the right to ask, how do we trade with just anyone, or do we have standards as a business that has values?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think it's time to ask that question. On a personal level, I mean, the support has been great. I mean, if you're if you're wealthy and want to help, extensively, there is now an option to sponsor a Ukrainian family. If you're wealthy and know someone, this is the time to act. There is a government website where there's a bunch of paperwork that you go through, but then you can guarantee and host a person or a family. I would advocate considering families from the war zone, because people from Kyiv, like myself, we don't need help. And let's
Mhm.
be honest. Or from Odessa or from Lviv, some of the big cities which have not seen much war. I mean, in Kyiv, there are some buildings destroyed, but that's not true for the majority of the population. Um, so I think the most effective thing is to donate money to the organizations that are working on the ground. I
Mhm.
know a lot of people donated to the Red Cross. They have not been on the ground much.
Hmm.
So my favorite fund, which I donated money to, is Come Back Alive. It's
Mhm.
a Ukrainian volunteer-run fund which has I think all the like it's properly registered as a nonprofit. It does reporting, and it's run by volunteers who were on the front line. So um, I think it's a trustworthy organizations. A lot of problem. The big problem with charity is a lot of them spend the vast majority of the money on keeping salaries for their staff, essentially. And I don't think that's the best way to spend, to be honest. And also, don't just donate to anyone, because lots of people are using this as an opportunity for fraudulent activity. So
Hmm.
if you do want to donate, donate to the organizations that you know of,
Hmm.
and just don't forget about Ukraine. Don't forget about us. I
Absolutely.
mean, there's sometimes you have to come to a realization there is not much you can do.
Hmm.
But send your thoughts and prayers. I think there is karma and there is this positive energy. We feel it,
Hmm.
and um, lots of things to do. But also, like, no Ukrainian is expecting you to do more, than you can handle, really.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
uh, if there isn't anything that you can do, don't feel guilty also, because
Hmm.
American government is doing a lot,
Hmm. Yeah.
and
Well,
it's your tax dollars.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's really good. You've given us a lot, and you've given us examples of how we can use our voices, and you've given us example of how we can use our resources, and you've given us examples of how we can use our spirits. And I think we can't ask for anything more than that. And from you, as far as ways that we can engage and that we can be supportive. And so, very grateful to you for that, and grateful to you for all your time that you've given to us, and the education that you've imparted to us this evening has been phenomenal. And my hope is that this is something that, if you're willing, we'll be able to do another check-in with you. And again, it's a way of providing updates, but it's a way of also keeping this in the forefront of our minds, and inspiring us in different ways that we can act, and hopefully make a difference. Um, and I'll just say one other thing too. We just had a comment come in, that there were uh, one of our audience members volunteered with other archivists to help save Ukrainian cultural heritage online, and the URL that she shared was sucha.org. I'm not familiar with that, but it really feels Save Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online is what that stands for, and it feels like that's an amazing way. Oh, Sucho, I'm sorry, SUCHO, Save Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online.org. Thank you. But
And
that feels
actually,
like an
that's
amazing way to make a difference. So
it
yeah.
is it is because if you look at Russia's tactics, destroying the theater in Mariupol, um,
Hmm.
looting museums. They are after the culture. They want to destroy, every trace of Ukrainian culture and identity. And in wars like this, culture is what they want to destroy. So
Hmm.
any help in preserving it is actually, not letting the aggressor fulfill their plans.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And we also, this same audience member just posed a question, and this is another way that Ukraine has been kind of in our minds very recently. More on a cultural side, pop culture side of things. But what do you think of the Coolish Orchestra winning Eurovision 22 with their song Stefiana, or Stefania? Sorry.
Well, I think it shows the just outpouring of support for Ukraine. It's I'm not a fan of music like this, but I can understand that, America exports culture,
Hmm.
um, and rap, whether you like it or not, is part of that cultural landscape. And but it also changes, right? So Ukraine imported it and mixed some folk music into it. Eurovision is a very pop-based song contest. So I think rap was an unusual. So the fact that they were unusual and it was representing a nation, I think that
Yeah.
was um, an interesting song, right? It was very different from everything else that was out there. And people say that sports is outside of politics or culture is outside of politics, but no,
Yeah.
actually, everything that people get involved in, business, everything has a part of politics. And I think this Eurovision contest, if you know, is half of the votes are cast by juries and half by viewers. So it's like this SMS voting. And on both counts, Ukraine got a lot of support. It didn't
Hmm.
win the jury, which usually judges the quality of the music. So they thought it was, good, but not the best. But the outpouring of support from viewers
Hmm.
was what helped Kalush win this competition. Um,
Yeah.
Eurovision is a trashy song contest, but in that case, I watched it and I appreciated uh, the support. It's
Sure. Yeah.
I
Well,
wasn't so
I'm
proud of the song, but the support was wow. It was like we're gonna win this.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. Well, and I have to tell you too that I'm a big football fan or soccer in U.S. And I have to tell you that there are a lot of eyes on Ukraine's national team, and I think there are going to be a lot of blue and yellow flying when they take the pitch, and the potential of the U.S. playing them in the World Cup or the World Cup bracket is something that a lot of people are keeping their eyes on as well. So I think your point about sports and pop culture and so on being linked, I think that's a really valid point. So.
It makes the connection very human and relevant.
Mhm.
It's not just um, it's not just about Ukraine or about the war. It's about having common interests and um, being
Yeah,
human.
it's going to be tough for Scotland, I think, whenever they face them. So, um, but yeah, but I want to say too that there's another question that just came in, and I think this is something that I really appreciate, and that's that the relationship that's being formed by you doing these sessions with our Blue Jay family. There's a question about how are your parents and asking if they're safe and if you're, we learned about Alexander earlier on, but how about your other family members and friends?
Well, it's a long story, but my dad is actually in Russia and
Hmm.
brainwashed by Russian propaganda, so I rarely talk to him.
Hmm.
And he asked me, whether I support Hitler on numerous occasions. So you can imagine the quality of that conversation that goes on. My mom is in Crimea, which is occupied by Russia,
Hmm.
and we don't know if there will be, if the war will go that way. So they're safe now. Whether they will be safe later, I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, my brother and his family are also in Crimea, so there is a potential for my brother to be drafted into the Russian army. He has no military training and has three small children, but that may be barrier. I don't know if Russia has any moral standards. He won't be drafted, but I will not be surprised at any of their actions. And I managed to convince my two sisters who were living in Crimea and they're not very young. They're I mean, they're not tiny sisters. They're my younger sisters, but they're 28 to move to Europe and to stay there for the time being, at least while there is an active phase of war. So um, one of them is in France and wants to come to United States, but you need a sponsor, so she hasn't found one yet. And I'm advocating her to go to Ireland, which is where another one of my sisters is. And they studied in London. They know English, so that's why I'm trying to advocate them to move to an English-speaking country for now. But everyone in my family is safe for now. But it is a very fast-moving type of war, and things change so fast. Um, it is not World War II scale where millions are dead. It's thousands. So it feels very distant. Um, and I used to do these daily updates that I'm fine, my friends are fine, and my
Right.
family is fine. And if I haven't posted anything, it's probably like things are fine, or as fine as they can be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that the risks are low of any terrible things happening to my family.
Mm-hmm.
Time will tell, right?
Yeah.
Chances are like everything will be fine, but it's not knowable at this
Mm-hmm.
point.
Yeah. Well, I'll just underscore there are expressions of support for you. There are expressions of care that are coming into the comments about you and the challenge that you must feel with regard to there being division, within your family unit and separation and so on. So, but there are expressions of care for you
I
and
really
just
appreciate this.
yeah, absolutely.
Another comment I would like to make on this is that it's not as hard. It hits you hard at first,
Mm-hmm.
but I think then you're very glad that things are clarified
Mm-hmm.
after the realization comes. So this is a terrible thing to say, maybe, but I've seen a lot of positive effect of this war on people.
Mm-hmm.
People in the streets are nicer to you.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's running, screaming, being angry. Um, Super helpful if you see someone struggling with something. Like people will donate money, like in the
Mm-hmm.
supermarket. Some older person doesn't have enough cash. I've seen so many cases of so much good being done. So many people are volunteering, and Ukraine was never famous for being very generous volunteers to our neighbors. Still communist legacy of everyone being afraid and suspicious of each other. This has transformed the country for the better in parts where people are not on the war front. And even in my family too, it's very important for me to understand where we are. Um, I've given the advice that I could, and
Mm-hmm.
the adults made their choices. And with my dad, I will just have to have a conversation with him after the war, and after there is a realization in Russia, I hope, of this atrocity, and an understanding that it's okay to be proud of your country, but it's not okay to hate other countries surrounding it. And that's the
Well
difference
said.
between
Mm-hmm.
nationalism, which is fine, you're proud of your nation,
Mm-hmm.
and this fascism, which is like everyone else is terrible and owes you, and destroy them, and
Mm-hmm.
because you're the best. That's not okay, and this is
Yeah.
unfortunately the mind state in Russia right now.
Mm-hmm.
And as equals, I think we can do much better.
Yeah. Well, it's and again, we've got some really great thinkers in our audience. When you were talking about the um, the vibe in Ukraine and how people are helping each other and they're kinder and so on, one of our audience members wrote, "Strangers helping strangers to help strangers." as a way of describing it, and also, kind of likening, this in some ways to aspects of the pandemic, and how it's not something that we want to happen, but it has shown in its challenges that it has been able to bring out some good in some people, and bring about some changes in people's lives that have been
Right.
overall very positive. So I guess that's a hope and wish that there can be good that comes out of so much tragedy and loss and challenge.
There has to be, because otherwise, I mean, there's not much hope, right?
Yeah.
But when you do have this near-death experience, right, that you're thinking this could be your last day, any moment can
Mhm.
change everything, and it really clarifies your thinking. And I think we'll be after this war. I think we'll be in a better world. I think there will be more clarity into who do we call our friends,
Yeah.
and who do we um, have the power not to enable when they're not very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate your perspective, Vlad. I appreciate you, and I care about you, and your Beluga family cares about you as well. And um, just know that you're in our hearts, you're in our minds. Ukraine is as well, and we are looking forward to keeping our connections with you strong, and our support um, for ways that we can make a positive difference strong as well. So thank you so much for being part of this evening, and um, stay well, be well, stay safe, and just know we're caring about you.
And I thank you, because really, time is the only resource that can be shared but never bought. Can be sold but can never be bought or taken back. Everyone listening in today have given me the greatest gift, and I thank you, and I appreciate you investing your time into you know basically knowing a little bit more about our crazy world.
Yeah. Well, without question, you matter, and we're caring about you. So we're looking forward to the next one of these, and you and I will be in touch. And for all of you who are audience members, thank you for joining us this evening. I am Mark Clapper, Executive Director of College Engagement at our alma mater, E-Town. And we've been learning from and caring about my friend and yours, Vlad. And Vlad, all the best to you.
Thank you so much.
You're
I
welcome.
feel much stronger with your support. I really do.
That's great. Thank you all.